Roll for Crit is made possible thanks to the support of viewers like you and our patrons on our Patreon page.
You can become a patron for just $1 a month at patreon.com/rollforcrit. Hey, it's Roll for Crit, and I'm Jonathan, here to bring you my review of Werewolf the Apocalypse Heart of the Forest, which is a brand new video game, a visual novel, if you will, available on PC, Mac, and Linux right now, based on the Werewolf the Apocalypse role-playing game system. So this uses a lot of familiar elements. If you are a role player, you will be gaining different attributes, changing your experience in those attributes as the game progresses, based on your choices that you make along the way as the story progresses. You play the role of Maya, who is a student, and you have traveled to Poland. You are trying to learn more about your family history. There's a lot of mysterious goings on in your family's past that may or may not have to do with werewolves. I won't spoil anything for you, but I think based on the title, you can probably guess where things are going to go. It is a visual novel, or if you're not familiar with that, or RPGs, choose your own adventure book is essentially the type of story that this is. You will be reading passages and then making decisions. Sometimes the decision is of what to say, how to respond to another character. Sometimes it's where to go, or what to do, or even just how to feel. It might ask you to say if you're confused or angry or scared. And based on those decisions, different things will happen in the story and your stats will change. You might gain more in your spirituality or your cunning or what have you. And your relationships could change with the other characters. They will inform you whether those other characters are currently friendly towards you, sympathetic, or unfriendly or hostile even, depending on how you interact with them. It's not always quite so simple as just making a choice and seeing where it leads you. Sometimes you will be forced to make certain choices or need to spend certain things to make certain choices depending on what's happened before. So you have three main stats that are going to affect this: rage, willpower, and health. And if your rage is really high, you're really angry, and you might find yourself losing control, and you might have to do certain things or be really encouraged to do certain things. You could also take actions that spend your rage, that will calm you down, and sometimes that could be a good thing or a bad thing. It really depends on how you want to take the story and how you want this character to act. Same goes for your willpower and health. They essentially work in the same way. And if your willpower or your health are at 0, your character is considered impaired and you will be unable to make certain decisions. So you have to be careful when they present you with a choice of which you can spend one of those to make something happen. Is this really when you want to do that? Are you sure you're going to have the willpower for later on when maybe you want it more? There's no voice acting in the game, but there is music and sound effects and different screen transitions and things that will pop up as you play in the background. So this is based on a role-playing experience, and in many ways it carries some things over from that pretty faithfully. You have a character sheet. Like I said, you have all these stats you're looking at, different ways that you can spend them with the rage and willpower. You could pretty easily just ignore all of that if you really wanted to. If you just play through and make those decisions and choose what you want and say, oh, every once in a while, for some reason, I lose a rage. I mean, you figured that out. It's not like it's hard to figure out. But my point is, you don't need to get too in the weeds and really be thinking about, oh, which stat is this going to raise? How's that going to affect my character in the future? If you don't want to. You can always reference it to the side and see where those things are at later on if you're more interested in that style of gameplay. This story, beyond trying to figure out the mystery of your family history, also revolves around this logging site, and you're trying to stop the logging in this national park. They're tearing down trees, and there's a whole thing with the werewolves and how they need to protect Mother Earth. I am not someone who has experience with the original Werewolf the Apocalypse RPG, So to me, discovering all this lore was brand new. I just thought, oh, werewolves, the full moon comes out, they become a werewolf, they get hit by a silver bullet. It's not quite that simple in this universe. There's a lot more to it. They have all these different tribes that you can just sign up for with different ideologies. There's a history of spirituality and how they work. There's different forms of the werewolf. So, again, minor spoilers, you do eventually get to turn into a werewolf. And I thought that was really cool because there are different types of werewolf that you can turn into, like just a regular wolf or a big strong wolf or kind of a bigger version of a human. And depending on the situation, sometimes you'll get to be asked to choose which one you want to be. And that was really neat. There are also sequences where, again, you're a werewolf, you're running around, you're tearing things up, you're going crazy, especially if your rage is really high, and it can be really satisfying and feel powerful. The choices come at you pretty frequently. It's hard for me to gauge exactly how significant all of them are. Usually, when they're very significant, they'll give you a little pop up that says, oh, you increased this stat, or this person now is friendlier towards you depending on what you did. Whereas sometimes it feels like maybe it was just flavor, but it does develop your character in some way. And your character really is a blank slate. It's up to you to decide how they act in any situation. Again, just like a regular role playing game, which I like. So by the end of it, you have this character that may be contradictory, or maybe you went all one path, like made them very peaceful. Maybe you made them very aggressive, very angry towards others. So there are different ways that you can take that. I do wish there was a little bit more to some of your choices rather than what I feel was often boiled down to a fairly binary system of angry or composed. And it was pretty much just, well, do I want to get angry about this or do I want to keep a cool head and go on with it? And yeah, I guess that's the theme of the game. So it works. And also for this a story like this with different branching paths and things, you don't want to make it too complicated. You don't want to overwhelm people. But sometimes it did seem a little bit simplistic in that regard. I also wish maybe your stats came into play a little bit more. Like I said, you have all these different stats, and later on in the game, you're kind of going to be driven towards whichever one you put the most points into, which I thought was a little disappointing. I wish that more of them mattered more often. And, like a lot of role playing games, oh, you have this many points in this thing. That means you get to do this, or you have this option. This was more so driving you onto just one or two of those paths that you were taking, which I guess does maybe increase some of the replay value, because then you can go back and try a different path rather than just seeing like a little smattering of all the different ones during one playthrough. And then there's really my biggest complaint with this game overall, which is that it ends, in my opinion, pretty abruptly. It's not a very long game. You could probably do one playthrough of it in 3 or 4 hours, 3 to 5 hours. I don't know, depending on how much you weigh your decisions, how fast a reader you are. And that's not my problem with it. I think the length is fine. It's just that around chapter 2 or 3 is when you get into all the werewolf stuff. And it opens up this whole new world of, oh, now I get to choose a tribe, and I have a rank, and I have new stats to deal with and new forms I can change into. And I was really excited when I discovered all that, because I thought, wow, I can't wait to see what different things this is going to affect and how my rank is going to progress over time. And the game has 6 chapters, I think. So they really don't do much with that. After they introduce all these systems that I think are really neat and more interesting than just the stuff that you have early on, the game ends. You really only get a few opportunities to really make use of any of that stuff. It feels like they just, didn't have the money for more development time, or I don't know what it is exactly, but it just feels like the game ends right as it's about to really get good. And while the story in the game is more or less concluded, it's not like it doesn't end on a cliffhanger or anything like that, at least in the ending I got. Maybe there are differences depending on what you choose. It certainly feels like the start of a larger adventure. It wasn't quite as satisfying by the end as I had hoped it would be. That said, in regards to the system itself and just how the gameplay looks and feels, I think they did a really great job with it. I love the different background animations and effects that are relatively simple, but they do a good job immersing you in that world. And even if all the choices aren't very compelling, I think it was enough to keep me engaged. It felt interactive. I would love to see them use this for more werewolf games or just totally other settings in the future. Crits and misses for Werewolf the Apocalypse Heart of the Forest. Crits. While the majority of the game is text-based, there are background sound effects and music that are just enough to make it feel dynamic and alive as you play. The mystery being presented here is fairly well developed, it's compelling enough for what it is, and the lore behind it and in the surrounding world is fascinating, especially to me as someone who is new to this setting. I really enjoyed learning more about the different werewolf tribes and how they all work. Being a werewolf feels powerful and exciting, and even though it's just a visual novel, you do get this visceral sense of having this rage inside of you and being able to take it out on unsuspecting innocent or not so innocent victims, depending on your point of view. And with the different forms that you can take, I really enjoyed that system as they designed it within the constraints of a visual novel. Misses. As cool as those werewolf powers are, it feels like just as they introduce them to you, the game is reaching its conclusion. It feels like there could have easily been another 4 or 5 chapters added on to this to make it feel a lot more satisfying. A big part of the story revolves around protecting this site from logging and taking care of the environment, and while I personally am in full support of those ideals in real life, the way it comes across in the story sometimes is a little heavy-handed, and if that's not your thing, some of that might rub you the wrong way. This game is available right now for PC, Mac, and what have you. I played it on Steam. It's $14.99, and I think that's a reasonable price. I wish it were a little longer. I wish there was more to it. Maybe they will eventually come out with a sequel or even DLC chapters for this, which I think would be a great addition, especially if it allows you to carry forward your progress and the choices that you made in this version of the game. But as it stands, I think still a pretty good buy if you are interested in the werewolf setting and if you are looking for a visual novel. If you like that style of gameplay, I really thought the way it was presented was very cool. I love the idea of having essentially a choose your own adventure with extra stats and things, but also that immersive experience with the music and the different artwork flashing in front of you. I thought was very cool, and I do really hope they do more with that in the future, because I think that's the most successful part of this. The story itself is good. It's nothing really incredible. It feels very much like an introduction to the world. For that matter, again, as someone who hasn't played the original RPG, I feel like now I want to play that RPG. I feel like this could be an awesome way to get people to learn that lore, a more fun way to do it if you want to play this with someone, as opposed to having them just read a player's guide or a manual or something like that. So that's a cool aspect of it. I don't know if they have any plans to release this on any other platforms, but I do think it would be a great one for like a mobile device or on the Nintendo Switch, if they could work out, make sure the font sizes are legible and everything on handheld devices. I think this would be a great one for that, so I hope to see it expand. And as long as you're okay with getting a little bit of a smaller experience, I think you'll have fun with it. It's Werewolf the Apocalypse Heart of the Forest. You can leave a comment down below to let me know if you've played this, what do you think, and are you a player of the original game that it's based on? How do you feel about the translation that they made in that regard? Are there other role-playing games you'd like to see them take this system for and make new games with those different settings? I'm sure there are a few you could think of. Talk to me down below and find links in the description to where you can find this game if you're interested. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Jonathan, and this has been Roll for Crit.
We want you to like and subscribe, and if you have the chance, take a look at our Patreon.
Thank you for being a friend. Subscribe to our channel and back again. Okay.